Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History, continuing our look at the Secret Service and its role it's played in the deep state plot to assassinate John F. Kennedy. And in this series, as you know, we started with the formation of the deep state and how it really began in the private sector with these rise of these corporations. And of course, the corporations had one interest, and that was to make as much money as possible, which we understand. They were motivated by greed. Public interest didn't matter. In fact, if you were found to be acting in the interest of the public, you could be fired. And uh, and they always immunized themselves so that anything they did, which in the early days was treacherous and unethical and immoral, but it wasn't treasonous. But they always immunized themselves, so there's never any accountability. It wasn't until this deep state made its way into the public sector after the world wars, when they were invited in by two successive progressive presidents, Woodrow Wilson during World War One and FDR in World War Two, to help run the wartime economy, that this ultra vires doctrine became part of the public sector. And so now instead of the public sector acting as a buffer against the private sector, now the public sector, the government, is acting the same, acting in its own self-interest against the interest of the public, firing or expelling anyone who wasn't on board acting in their own interest, uh, and immunizing themselves from any and all accountability. And that's when you see a merging of the private and public sectors. And all of a sudden, the American people don't have anybody looking out for their interests because everybody who's anybody, whether the private sector or the public sector, is looking out for their own interests. And this is where JFK becomes a problem because he was looking out for the people. He was not looking out for these interests necessarily. And the normal way of means by which they get rid of people supporting the opponent in the next election is not going to work. He was going to win re-election in 64. So that's why a more drastic measure had to be uh, carried out because they had to get rid of him. And so that's ultra vires. Well, and of course, the working definition of the deep state during this Cold War era was the, the national security apparatus, all the industries that fed it. And they became obsessed with uh, war because it was so profitable. And so these foreign wars, this is where they crossed over into treason. You know, when it was just greed, it was treacherous, immoral, and unethical. But then when it was propagandizing or false flagging us into wars, a succession of wars, starting with the Spanish American War and then World War One, World War Two, Cold War, etc. Uh, that's when people are dying, for these wars that these deep staters are foisting on our country. And we always have to have a boogeyman to keep people on alert so that these wars, people don't suspect that these wars are uh, unnecessary. And anyway, as a result of all that, they start committing treason. We define treason as working against the interests of your own country, overthrowing your own government, killing the king, selling out your own people. This happened over and over and over again, but they always immunized themselves and they never faced any accountability. So, in the interest of making money, they crossed the Rubicon from committing treachery to committing treason. And then, as long as presidents or policymakers went along with it, they were part of it. But if anyone ever stood up, said, no, we're not going to war in Vietnam. No, we're going to end the Cold War. No, we're not going to go to war in Laos. We're not going to go to war in Cuba. We're not going to do all this stuff. Uh, the CIA, all these covert ops, I'm going to rein them in. It wasn't until a guy like JFK comes along and started standing up to this deep state and saying no, and they realize they can't vote him out of office normal ways. They're going to have to do something else. And we've gone through all these deep state operators, like the CIA, like the Pentagon, and we haven't got to the FBI yet, but we will. We got the LBJ, and now we're at the Secret Service. And I answered, hopefully, in the last two episodes, two questions. The first question was there any advance notice the Secret Service had that a Dallas could happen? And I went through a long list of of plots to kill JFK just in the month prior to him actually getting killed. I started in November. There was actually a plot in the summer in Washington, D.C. that got foiled. But there was the plot November 2 in Chicago. And then there was the plot in the 16th in Palm Springs. There was the plot in the 18th in the morning in Tampa, and then the 18th in the afternoon in Miami. And by the time we get to Dallas, the Secret Service should have been on high alert if they're doing their job. So that's the answer to that question. Yes, they most certainly had prior notice. And the second question was, do you have to corrupt everybody in the Secret Service to get them to go along with this plot? The answer is no. You only have to get just the movers and shakers at the top. They're the ones who set the personnel. They're the ones that make all the policy decisions. They're the ones that give the orders. All the folks riding on the cars, walking beside the cars, in the blue suits, wearing the little earpieces, those guys take orders. They're like military grunts, right? They take orders. You just got to corrupt ones at the top. And I named three names. And we talked about two of them in particular the other day. Haven't really got to Thomas Kelly yet. James Rowley's the head. He's the guy that's going to determine all the personnel, right? So he's clearly a main instrument here. And of course, he's really friendly with LBJ, pictured here in the top left. We'll talk more about Thomas Kelly, but he's the guy that's going to be sent in after the shootings happen to clean up the mess, the loose ends. And then the guy on the ground, Emory Roberts, who's making all these terrible decisions on the ground. He's sort of an extension of James Rowley. Rowley stays in D.C. in his office there and makes his decisions from there. Emory Roberts is the guy on the ground. And so those are the ones you got to corrupt. And everybody else will fall in line. And so those are the answers to those two questions. I had shown you some pictures here. I wanted to go back and just clean up a couple things. First, I mistakenly said that the two men that were the two Secret Service agents that were called off by Emory Roberts from riding on the back running boards of the presidential limo there at Love Field were Lawton and Rady. It wasn't Lawton and Rady, it was Lawton and Ripka, Hank Ripka. Ripka's not pictured here, but I'm mistaken. I corrected it later in the video, but I want to make sure correct it again. So it was Lawton and Ripka. You can see Lawton here with his hands out saying, "What? This is what we always do. What do you mean I'm not?" They went to a coffee shop to kill time. The other thing I wanted to correct was those two bottom pictures. The one on the left is the picture of Dallas. And as you can see, there's no motorcycles there, and there's no presence on the ground. The 112th Military Intelligence Group's not there. There's no police. The only folks there are behind the limo. As far as the limo is concerned, it's completely exposed in Dallas. Juxtapose that against the motorcade earlier that year in Dublin, Ireland. Now, in this particular photo, you don't see any motorcycles. I'll show you a picture here later where you will see the motorcycles. The motorcycles were all there in Ireland. But in this particular street, because the crowd was pressed up against the cars themselves, they removed the motorcycles. And instead, they brought up the Secret Service to be around JFK himself. And they also have uniformed police officers in the crowd. So the type of security is the security is the same as it normally should be if the motorcycles are there. It's just in a different manner, shape, and form. It's with live human buffers or Secret Service agents who are up and around JFK. They're not behind him in a car, and he's up there standing by himself. And there are police officers in the crowd, and there should have been police officers or intelligence officers in the crowd at Dallas, but there weren't. And of course, the motorcycles are removed, and all the Secret Service agents are behind him in the car. So, there are different ways to skin a cat. And if you're going to be in compressed, logistically, if you're going to be in a street like this where the crowd is pressed up against, you can't have the motorcycles in addition to the cars. It makes it difficult. There's just too many people. So you adjust and you put the Secret Service agents around the president as if he's in a rope line shaking hands. They do that too, right? They don't have motorcycles around around the president when he's shaking hands in a rope line. They have Secret Service personnel pressed up against him, forming a circle around him, protective covering around him as he proceeds along. That's sort of the way they did it there in Dublin, Ireland, at least on this particular street. I'll show you a later photo where you see the motorcycles, you see the cops, and the crowd's back. So you adjust to the environment, which is what they've done. In Dallas, the crowds are back. There's no intelligence officers on the crowd. There's no motorcycles around him, and there's no Secret Service up and around him. They're all behind him. The field of fire is wide open. This is why the Secret Service refused to turn over documents about prior motorcades, how they were secured to compare against Dallas. They said that they destroyed the documents, and when the Warren Commission asked for them, and when the House Select Committee asked for them years later, they refused, saying they didn't have any. They didn't want anyone comparing the all the other motorcades that had happened and how security had been arranged in those prior motorcades and comparing it against what happened in Dallas, because the comparison was not going to reflect well in the Secret Service. They knew it, so they just refused to turn over the documents. This is the bottom left picture. That's the insignia of the 112th Intelligence Group that was supposed to be there out of Fort Sam Houston and San Antonio. It was not there. I also wanted to mention something else about Gerald Benn and Floyd Boring. I talked about how they were absent that day, and I used the words honest broker or straight arrow, and that was the reason that they weren't there. I can't say that definitively. There's really two schools of thought on this. One is that they were honest brokers, and so they had to be removed by Raleigh because they were not going to allow the clusterfuck in Dallas to take place. They would not have permitted that. They were too experienced. They were too good at their jobs. They would have known. They would have smelled a rat, is what I'm saying. And so he removed them and told them to go on vacation or whatever, and went ahead with the clusterfuck that became Dallas. That's one way of looking at it. That's a very generous, charitable way of looking at it as far as Gerald Benn and Floyd Boring are concerned. There's another way to look at it, and that is that they were very much involved in it, but to preserve their alibis, they did all the planning in advance. They set everything in motion for the clusterfuck to happen, and at the last minute, they were replaced, so they didn't have to be there when it happened, so they could claim ignorance and blame it on the scapegoats that were there, scapegoated on the patsies that went in their place. I don't know. I can't prove one way or the other, but I will. But it's part of a pattern that these two were not there, and these were the A-listers. These are the guys that always ran these things, always in charge of these things, and for some reason in Dallas they weren't. And get used to that phrase because you're going to hear it again and again. For some reason in Dallas. Anyway, you can draw your own conclusions, and that would be the subject of some more research, interesting research to determine whether these guys were good guys or bad guys. I don't know, but I just know they weren't there. The other guy, you notice who replaced him. We're going to talk about Kellerman and Greer today. When did they ever make a hash of things? You know, so I think sometimes the assumption is, well, if Ben and Boring had been there, Dallas wouldn't have happened because Kellerman and Greer screwed things up to such a degree that anybody else would have been preferable, especially the guys that were so experienced. I don't know, maybe it was Ben and Boring's intent to plan the clusterfuck and then plan the fact they wouldn't be there and in their place. Although I know Gerald Benn planned to be there, you know, he was told he was going on vacation. And so maybe Ben was a good guy, Boring was bad. I don't know. I just know they weren't there. We also told the story of Thomas Shipman, and I gave you, he was the regular driver and how he died so suspiciously 5 weeks prior. And I gave you 4 scenarios. A, he didn't have any knowledge of the plan. That didn't make any sense because why would they have to kill him? B, he had foreknowledge, refused to go along with it. That makes the most sense. If you have knowledge of it and you refuse to go along with it, now you're a loose end. You can't just be told to stay home because you might talk. So you have to be killed. The other scenario is he was a dirty cop. He would have gone along with it if he was there. Why would they replace him? Why would they kill him? If he was dirty, he'd have been there. The other scenario was he had no foreknowledge of the Dallas plan, but probably wouldn't have gone along. And his his supervisors knew it. In that case, they just told him to go on vacation, like they told Ben to go on vacation. But instead, they killed him. So I think the most obvious scenario is that he had foreknowledge of the Dallas plan, refused to go along with it, and now he has to be dealt with because he's a loose end and replaced by somebody who would go along with it. In addition to the security stripping of removing Ben and Boring and removing Shipman, now 11 of the most experienced Secret Service personnel were transferred out the 60 days prior and replaced by inexperienced people. These are the guys that just take orders. This reminds me, when you think of security stripping, in my context as a teacher, it reminds me of principals who really like inexperienced teachers. They like those first year teachers. They're yes sir, no sir people. They take orders. They they don't ask questions. They don't question anything. They just do what they're told, and they're cheap. They have no experience to know any better. Uh, they'll fall in line with whatever new initiative a new principal might have or whatever, and they're just easily controlled. I've seen it so many times in 30 years of teaching. I've seen it so many times where as you age and you get more experience and in theory you get better as a teacher, you're actually less valued by the administrators. They would prefer their entire teaching staff be rookies because they're easily controlled. And you know, so those of you that are listening that are teachers, maybe you can attest to that as well. But I've seen it so many times. Well, here you have again a boss back in Washington needing people that won't question the plan or or you know be suspicious of anything. These orders that don't make any sense. So he replaces the 11 most experienced with 11 very inexperienced, and voila, you now have security stripped the entire White House Secret Service detail. You've replaced the old hands with new hands, and is it any wonder they turned it into a clusterfuck? We talked about Drew Pearson in his article. He initially thought there were 6 Secret Service agents who went out the night before, drank and partied. Turns out it was 10. It was 10 of the 15, so 2/3 of the entire detail. In addition to it being a shell of its former self, now 2/3 of it is out the night before. They have firemen back at the hotel protecting the president. Turns out this isn't an isolated incident, been happening on a regular occurrence. But anyway, we're talking about Dallas. So they got firemen back at the hotel. 2/3 of the White House detail is at the press club at first. Then they go to the cellar and they're drinking. There's drugs, there's women, there's dancers, strippers. They lose their guns and their credentials in the bathroom. So, and we find this out because in January 64, the Secret Service has to reissue new badges and credentials to all their agents because the 10 that were out the night before Dallas happened lost their credentials and their guns. And of course, the next day, there's men running around all over Dealey Plaza with Secret Service badges and credentials, claiming to be Secret Service agents, seizing people's film, taking their cameras, ordering people to be detained and questioned, ordering people to leave certain areas. And they all had Secret Service credentials, and everybody just assumed they were Secret Service. Turns out all of the Secret Service agents were accounted for, and they were all in the motorcade or back at a coffee shop at Love Field, but none of them were on the ground. So who were all these people pretending to be Secret Service agents with all the badges and the credentials? Where'd they get those badges and credentials? I know who makes them. We'll talk about that later, but where'd they get them? Might they have got them from the cellar? When their agents lost all those credentials at the cellar, might there have been somebody there to collect them and distribute them to people that were involved in the plots that they had covered the next day? I don't know. But I do know that 10 of those agents lost their credentials. My goodness, can't make this stuff up, right? And then we talked about the difference between the women's building museum at the fairgrounds and the Trade Mart, and how one was defendable and the other wasn't. How JFK's people, his campaign wanted to go to the one that was defendable for obvious reasons. LBJ's people, including the governor, the mayor, the Secret Service, Raleigh, they all wanted him to go to the trademark. And you can see how what a security nightmare it would be to try and defend somebody or protect somebody at the trademark with all the catwalks and go 3 stories up and all the entrances and exits. My goodness, it's a nightmare. Uh, and this was the guy that we talked about on the ground. You know, Raleigh was making a lot of these decisions regarding personnel back in D.C., but then once they got on the ground, it was Emory Roberts' show. And so a lot of these decisions, such as removing Lawton and Ripka from the back of the limo, that was Emory Roberts' decision. And you can see him sitting there around the back of the trail car. And it was his decision to remove Godfrey McHugh from the front middle. If you look at my cursor, you can see Godfrey McHugh in Ireland sitting right in the front middle seat of that limo JFK's riding in. That was where he always sat. Top picture, I see a circle here. Godfrey McHugh standing to JFK's right behind him at the White House. He was ever present. He was always there. But then for some reason in Dallas, there's that phrase again, he was Emory Roberts said, no, you're not going to sit in the front. You're going to sit in the back. We're going to put you in a car in the back of the motorcade. He protested. And they said, well, JFK doesn't want you there. He wants to be able to see out that front window. No one ever heard JFK say that. That's what the Secret Service said. And then they also removed the flatbed media truck. This is another Emory Roberts decision. And so you see what's happened is the field of fire has been opened up completely in front of JFK and to the side. You don't see any motorcycles there to the side. You don't see any motorcycles in front. Godfrey McHugh is not in the front seat, in the middle. The media truck's gone. I mean, it's wide, stinking open. And then you compare that to here's that picture in Ireland where I said the motorcycles were. So you can see the motorcycles in front, to the side, and back. You can see the Secret Service in the trail car. Now that they are in an open street setting, and the motorcycles can rejoin the motorcade, the Secret Service kind of melts back to the trail car, and all that's left on the limo car are the 2 on the running boards. But you can see along the side of the streets, uniformed police officers holding the crowd back. So you've got a presence in the crowd, you got a presence on the street around the limo, you got a presence behind the limo, and you got the 2 guys on the running boards. You have a protective shell around Jake, and this is in a friendly city. This is where they loved him. He was local boy made good, right? He's coming back. The Kennedy family's originally from Ireland. Now he's president of the United States. He's a hero. Now, I'm not saying he couldn't be killed in Dublin, Ireland. You don't assume those things. But compared to Dallas, this is a cakewalk. Then you go to Dallas, and instead of more security, because it's going to be a tougher motorcade, he has less. There's no motorcycles to the side or the front. There's no police, no intelligence officers in the crowd holding them back. There's no Godfrey McHugh in the front middle. There's no flatbed media truck. He's just exposed, and all the Secret Service are behind him in a car. And he has 2 Secret Service agents in the car with him. Turns out they're snakes. They're not going to do their job. And the ones in the trail car aren't going to move. He is completely and utterly exposed. And when folks asked later at the Secret Service, why are those motorcycles removed? They said, well, JFK didn't want them. They made too much noise. And he wanted to be able to hear the people and them to hear him, kind of a thing. Again, no one ever heard him say that. Just like no one ever heard him say he wanted Godfrey McHugh removed. But that's, he's dead. You can't ask him after the fact. Where we left off in the last episode, we talked about the motorcade route, how the original route was straight on Main, and then it was changed to bring the target to the shooters. And you can see, I believe there was a shooter in the county records building, which is right there on Houston. I believe the shooter and the spotter was, those are the mob guys. It was Nicoletti was in the building as the shooter, and I believe his spotter was Johnny Rosselli. In the Daltex building, the shooter was David Morales, and I believe his spotter was James Braden. James Braden was actually arrested. We know he was there. These are the same 2 guys, by the way, according to Abraham Bolden, that were arrested in Chicago 20 days earlier in suspicion of taking part in a plot there to kill the president. Same 2 guys, Morales and Braden. They just moved to Dallas. Texas School Book Depository, we know the shooter was in the 6'4" sniper was LBJ's personal hitman, Mac Wallace, because his fingerprint was found there. Had no reason to be there. And in a grassy knoll, I believe the shooter was Roscoe White, and he was there with his spotter, whom I believe was Tippit. And you'll next see Roscoe White and Tippit Oak Cliff after the shooting, when Tippit gets shot, I believe, by Roscoe White. And then I believe there was a shooter in the truck. Either I believe he was on street level under the triple underpass, because of the trajectory of that first shot went through the windshield of the limo, right where Godfrey McHugh would have been sitting. Anyway, he was hidden away and under the triple underpass somewhere. I don't know who that was. And most likely have spotter as well. I don't know who they were. But that's 5 guns. A gun in the county records building, a gun in the Daltex building, a gun in the Texas School Book Depository, a gun behind on the grassy knoll, and a gun under the triple underpass. So essentially what they did is change the route to bring him into the kill zone between 5 rifles. If he goes straight on Main and keeps speed, remember the speed's supposed to be about 26 miles an hour, keeps speed, it's an impossible shot for all those shooters. But if you turn him, put him on a 90-degree turn onto Houston and a 120-degree turn onto Elm, it slows the limo down to about 11 miles an hour. And then you got your guy in the driver's seat. And you know that if you miss the first shot, you don't kill him, the driver will hit the brakes and it'll just slow down even more until you get the job done. Then that's the perfect scenario. You bring him right into the kill zone. It's a turkey shoot. That's what it is. It's a turkey shoot. Um, the reroute was explained. They said, well, we want everybody on Dealey Plaza to get a good look at the president as well. Turns out there wasn't anybody. There was hardly anybody on Dealey Plaza. All the crowds were back on Main Street, and there were some on Houston. But if the motorcade had gone straight on Main, those folks on Houston could have easily they could have turned around on Dealey Plaza instead of looking at Elm. They just turn around and look at Main. And there's big sidewalks on the other side of Main, so that it wasn't necessary for crowd purposes, for the purposes of the motorcade and the parade, all that kind of stuff. It was necessary to reroute so that they get JFK, the target, in between all those rifles. That's why the reroute. Continuing on with these security breakdowns, uh, the fact that they took this motorcade instant amongst all these tall buildings that had wide open windows. And this was a hostile city. When they arrived at Love Field, before they got off the plane, JFK turned to Jackie and says, "Welcome to Nook Country." He knew Dallas was he'd been warned, don't go to Dallas. And he said, "I gotta go. I represent everybody, even people didn't vote for me." Dallas was the largest southern city that hadn't voted for JFK in 60. Even though LBJ was on the ticket, he's a native son. They hated JFK so much they voted against him. He's a Democrat. Dallas is a Democrat town. They still voted against him. When he got to Dallas that day, there were wanted posters hanging all over town. And it was a full-page ad in the Dallas Morning News accusing him of treason. I mean, this was a hostile city. They spit on his ambassador to the UN like 2 weeks prior. They hated Kennedy and these Northeastern liberals. They thought they were soft on communism. They hated their civil rights stand. They hated everything about him. So it's going to be a dangerous. And here they are, motorcading through town, tall buildings, open windows, and there's no police presence on the ground. The military intelligence group that would be there checking these open windows, checking block by block as the motorcade proceeds, they're not there. They're not there. So that's a violation. And this is the 112th Military Intelligence Group. The story, you know, check out the source on this. Fletcher Prouty is a really good source because he was the liaison. He was the guy between the CIA and the Pentagon. He was the guy when the CIA did their covert ops overseas and they needed military backup. They went to Fletcher Prouty and he arranged the military backup. So he worked at the CIA, he worked at the Pentagon. He was the liaison. And one of his jobs was to arrange for these military intelligence groups in different cities to arrive and assist the Secret Service in protecting the president as they motorcaded through town. It was his job. And in the lead up to Dallas, he was preparing to call the 112th, just like he normally would, to arrange for this, when he was sent by his boss, General Ed Lansdale, on this wild goose chase out to New Zealand to escort some VIPs out there. And he was out of the way. And when he got back and he realized and found out the 112th wasn't there, he's like, why in the world weren't they there? And it was his job normally to arrange that. So he was doing some checking to find out. He called the 112th, says, why weren't you there? And they said, we got a call from Washington, told us not to. They told us to stand down. They didn't need us. So it really paints Ed Lansdale in a suspicious light. When you understand that for no apparent reason, just like Gerald Ben was told he's going to be on vacation instead of in Dallas doing his job as head of the Secret Service on the day JFK was shot. On that same weekend, Lansdale tells Prouty, you're going to take this VIP group to New Zealand. And he assumes, incorrectly, but he assumes that someone else will fill in and do his job while he's gone. Nobody does. In fact, quite the contrary. They tell him to stand down. So it really begs the question: what was General Ed Lansdale's role in all of this? But as far as Prouty is concerned, he did some digging when he got back, and he found out that 112th Military Intelligence Group was told to stand down. Now, this would have been a uniformed presence on the ground, on the streets, keeping the crowd back, in the buildings, checking the open windows, walking the route along with the motorcade. Uh, a uniform presence. You think about the fatal shot that came on the ground on the grassy knoll. They would have been up there instantly. No one would have escaped, right? If they hadn't cleared it in advance, they'd have been up there instantly because they'd have been right there. But instead, they were removed so that when you see the pictures, the only ones running up the grassy knoll to try to find out who the shooter was are basic spectators. A cop here, a cop there, but mostly spectators. It's a totally different ball game. So again, security stripping, removing obstacles to the plot in advance. This is the bubble top that was removed by Sam Kinney. Sam Kinney is the driver of the backup car. He removed it and said later that he was ordered to remove it by LBJ's top aide, Bill Moyers, who again blames it on Kennedy, says, well, Kennedy doesn't want the bubble top. It's a nice day. He wants to be able to, you know, mingle with the people. And can't ask him. No one heard him say it. This is the third time the Secret Service has blamed Kennedy. They said, Kennedy said Godfrey McHugh needs to be moved. Kennedy said the motorcycles need to be removed. Kennedy says the bubble top needs to be removed. Of course, he's dead, so we can't ask him. But no witness has ever heard him say that. And it just stands to reason if that were true, then there wouldn't have been motorcycles in San Antonio or Ireland or Houston. There wouldn't have been a bubble top in any of those places. There wouldn't have been Godfrey McHugh in any of those places, but there always were. The only exception was Dallas, which again, I think begs the question why the Secret Service would never turn over documents that compared motorcades prior to the motorcade in Dallas. They didn't want that comparison. They didn't want anything in black and white that would show that Dallas was uniquely different. Jackie Kennedy said that morning, this is just kind of an interesting anecdote, at 2 a.m. in their hotel room, JFK and LBJ got in a screaming match because LBJ did not want his friend Connally in the, quote, death car with JFK the next day. He wanted his enemy, Senator Ralph Yarborough, in that car instead. And you got to assume LBJ, if you followed my last series on LBJ, it's more than an assumption. LBJ knew what was fixing to happen. And if two birds could get knocked out with one stone, so be it. He hated both. He hated JFK, he hated Yarborough. Put them in that death car. Let Connally, my best friend, ride back in the car with me. He'll be protected. It shows foreknowledge on the part of LBJ. It also shows a lack of foreknowledge on the part of Connally. Hard to imagine Connally, if he knew he was going to be in the car coming under a hail of bullets, that he would agree to ride in that car. I think Connolly knew what he needed to know, which was to get JFK to Dallas to ride that motorcade. Uh, but as far as the details, I don't think he knew, which is why he was in that car. And this is why he also got shot. Some people think he was actually another target, that they wanted to take him out too. But anyway, uh, they did have that screaming match. And JFK is like, no, 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 no. I'm in Texas. I should be with the governor of the state of Texas. And the senator, I know you don't like him, but he's going to ride in a car with you. And they saved Ralph Yarborough's life, right? It almost cost Connolly his life. But this is it comes in pieces, so you can store it in the trunk of the car. But Jackie had actually requested, and there are witnesses. In fact, she said it herself later. She actually had requested the bubble top be on the car because it had rained all night, all morning, and there were puddles everywhere. She was wearing that pretty little pink suit. She didn't want to get splashed. And so she requested the bubble top. And of course, the Secret Service said, no, JFK requested it be removed. So, so here's what we have so far. And I really think it's important to put all this together so you can see how the security was stripped away. Some people call them Secret Service security breakdowns. That's a very charitable view of it. I think that it was intentional security stripping. So far they've ignored the advance warnings talked about Chicago, Tampa, Miami. Uh, they've ignored all that. They've traded out all the experienced personnel for inexperienced personnel so that the detail that everyone sees that day on the ground is just a shell of its former self. They've ordered the 112th Military Intelligence Division to stand down. They're not there. The agents, 2/3 of the entire detail ends up partying all night the night before. They lose their guns. They lose their credentials. They're drinking, hanging out with prostitutes. There's drugs. Who knows? Next morning, they're tired. They're inebriated. On the most important day of their life, they don't know it, but on the most important day of their life, they're not up to the task, clearly. Now, it's an interesting thought that I can't prove this, but part of me thinks that this was intentional, that the bosses wanted their underlings to go out and party the night before so that when this happens, because you got to think, if you're in charge of the Secret Service and you're involved in this plot, you know you're going to take a hit. And you'd rather pass it off as negligence or inexperience or inappropriate behavior, but not criminal behavior. You're not part of any plot. You're not part of any conspiracy. It's just boys being boys kind of thing. That's an easier sell. That's a less incriminating sell. And it's easy. You can explain that under human nature kind of thing. So it's almost like they blessed them going, because you have to know that if there's 15 Secret Service agents on the ground that day, and 10 of them disappear all night, and they leave the protection of the president to a bunch of Dallas firemen, you've got to know that they would look around and realize, hey, where's the rest of my men? They're all gone. Where are they? And there's ways of handling that and getting them back where they're supposed to be, but they didn't. They were gone all night. And it was not the first time. According to Abraham Bolden, this has been going on and going on and going on. This was a regular pattern of behavior. So it speaks to sort of a culture within the Secret Service that became convenient on which to blame the assassination later, because it sure is preferable to blaming it on actual complicity in the conspiracy, right? And so anyway, they're out all night, and then they remove the bubble top. So then you add to that they removed two agents, Lawton and Ripka, from the back running boards, that opening up a field of fire. Then they removed 8 motors from behind, right? Because Ripka Lawton would have been blocking the shot from behind, in theory, from behind, from hitting the president. He'd been standing right in the way. Then they removed the 8 motorcycles, which opened up the field of fire to the side, the front. Then they removed Godfrey McHugh to the front of the limo, opened up the field of fire right through that windshield. And then they removed the flatbed media truck in front, uh, which again opens up the field of fire in front. And then they changed the motorcade route to bring the target, JFK, right in between 5 rifles. And they included in there tall buildings, 90-degree turns, 120-degree turn, less than 26 mile an hour. I mean, where it's just any of these taken by themselves is a terrible mistake that someone should be reprimanded for afterwards. But you put them all together, and it's like, wait a second. Again, I asked that question: when does coincidence end and conspiracy begin? Right? And so what you end up with is a turkey shoot, and the president has no idea he's being led like a lamb to the slaughter. And I told you we get to the driver. According to Secret Service protocols, the driver is obligated. This is right out of their manual. Quote, the Secret Service driver is obligated to drive at maximum speed, taking evasive actions if necessary if shots are fired. So in the event of anything out of the ordinary, the driver has one job: hit the gas and get out of there, take evasive action. That's his job. According to multiple witnesses, and we'll go through them, the driver, William Greer, did not hit the gas. He hit the brake, slowed the limo to a near stop, and took no evasive actions. Just sat there. Just sat there. And if he was moving, he was rolling very slowly. There's some witnesses that, I mean, obviously, the fact that Clint Hill caught the limo on foot, we see that on video where he runs up, he jumps. The fastest sprinter in the world cannot exceed 15 miles an hour. Now, this is not the fastest sprinter in the world. Clint Hill is in a full suit with dress shoes. He gets off the running board of the car behind him and runs and catches the limo in front of him. Jackie is able to climb up on back, extend her hand, help him up, and is grabbing pieces of her husband's skull with her other hand while the car is basically just sitting there, barely moving. The fact that he could run and catch it, no, you know that the limo is going less than 15 miles an hour. And the fact that Jackie can get up on the back without being thrown off, the car is barely moving. 60 plus witnesses said the limo slowed almost to a stop. Ralph Yarborough, the Texas senator, remember he's a couple cars back with LBJ, says when the noise of the shot was heard, the motorcade slowed to what seemed to be a complete stop. The cars all stopped. Gene Hill, an eyewitness, says the motorcade came to almost a halt at the time the shots rang out. And I would say Kennedy's limo almost stopped. Jackie herself said if the agent had hit the gas before the third shot, Jack might still be alive. 5.6 seconds from first to last shot. Plenty of time for the first shot did not kill the president. This is right here, the first shot. Hit him in the neck. He's still alive. If he hits the gas here, the president lives. They don't have the opportunity to get that fatal headshot. Bo Byers, Houston Chronicles, the presidential limo came almost to a stop, a dead stop. Earl Brown, a Dallas police officer, said the first I noticed the limo was when it stopped. After it made the turn and when the shots were fired, it stopped. John Reedy, we showed a picture of him. He was in the Secret Service car behind. He says, quote, I heard what sounded like firecrackers going off from my post on the right front running board. The president's car slowed. Robert Baskin, Dallas Morning News, the motorcade ground to a halt. Mary Woodward, Dallas Morning News, instead of speeding up the car came to a halt. Alan Smith, eyewitness, the limo was 10 feet from me when a bullet hit the president in the forehead. The car went about 5 feet and stopped. Akis Campbell, eyewitness, after I heard the shots, the car bearing President Kennedy began to slow down, a near stop. Peggy Joyce Hawkins, eyewitness, she was standing on the front steps of the book depository. The president's car was less than 50 feet from me when he was shot. It slowed down, almost coming to a full stop. Hugh Betzner, another eyewitness. I looked down the street. I could see the president's car, another one, and the cars were stopped. Bill Newman, who's sitting right on the grassy knoll in front, said after the final shot, the car momentarily stopped. The driver seemed to have a radio or a phone up to his ear, and he seemed to be waiting on some word. I've maintained that they stopped. I still say they did. So the driver, you know, and remember, he replaced the driver who died 5 weeks prior. The driver did his job. You don't move until the job is done. Now, what about the Secret Service agent in the passenger seat? According to Secret Service protocol, right out of their manual, quote, the Secret Service agent in the passenger seat is required to cover the president's body with his own. Remember, there was plenty of time. 5.6 seconds from first shot to last. Roy Kellerman, another fill-in, was the agent in the front, never moved from his seat at the first shot. Later, he said that he yelled over at Greer to step on it after he heard JFK tell him, quote, I've been hit, get me out of here, after the first shot hit him in the throat, which is interesting. How could you speak after you've been hit in the throat? But nevertheless, from the first shot, which was non-fatal, hit the president in the back, and then he had the shot in the front. And from the first shot to the end, he had 5.6 seconds to cover the president's body. He never moved. So the two agents, and this is why I say they were snakes, the two agents in the front cut of the seat of the car, of the limo, one was supposed to hit the gas. He didn't. He hit the brakes. One was supposed to jump over you can see he'd have to jump over that frame there, jump over Connolly in the jump seat, and land on top of Kennedy and literally sit on him. But he had plenty of time to do it. Never moved. What about the follow-up car? Now, here's Sam Kinney. You see the circle there. He's the driver. Clint Hill, I've got him identified, standing on a running board there. And Emery Roberts is sitting in the passenger seat. You see him with the sunglasses there. There were 8 total Secret Service agents on board, each armed with automatic weapons. Their only job is to protect the president. Now Clint Hill is the personal protector for Jackie, but all the others are geared for the president. And the only one who took any action, moved at all, was Clint Hill to protect Jackie. The protocol, again, right out of the manual, upon hearing any kind of shots or anything out of the ordinary, the driver of the follow-up car is supposed to place his car or his vehicle in the line of fire, which would have meant on Elm Street that he pull up beside the limo and get in between the president's limo and the grassy knoll to somehow maneuver around to the side of him or to the front of him or take some evasive or some action to try to get in the way of the shoot. He never moved. He came to a stop just like Greer did in the limo. Took no action. And according to the testimony of these 8 agents, why didn't you jump out? You're on the running boards. Why didn't you jump off? Why didn't you get out of the car and go help the president? They all said the same thing. Emery Roberts, who's sitting right there in the passenger seat, ordered them to stand down. So just like he ordered the 2 agents to get off the running boards back at left field, he's now ordering the 8 agents, even though the president's limo is coming under fire in front of them, right in front of them, he orders them all to stand down. The only one that disobeyed him was Clint Hill. And we've all seen the pictures. They're iconic, right? He jumps off and he runs up there, jumps on the back to help Jackie. He literally disobeyed orders. The other 8 or 7 all obeyed orders and stayed in the car, never moved. Never moved. Now, contrast that with what happened with Lyndon Baines Johnson's car. This is his own testimony to the Warren Commission. Quote, I was startled by the sharp report or explosion, but I had no time to speculate as to its origin because Agent Youngblood turned in a flash immediately after the first explosion. hit me on the shoulder, and shouted to all of us in the back seat to get down. I was pushed down by Agent Youngblood. Almost the same moment which he hit or pushed me, he vaulted over the back seat and sat on me. Uh, when they asked Ladybird, she corroborated it, said Ruth Youngblood, who's sitting there in the front seat, he's the driver with the cowboy hat, I believe it was, vaulted over the front seat on top of Lyndon, threw him to the floor, and said, "Get down." So you see two different protocols. A protocol for the president, which means basically we're going to stand down and no one's going to follow procedure. The driver's going to hit the brakes instead of the gas. The passenger is not going to vault over and protect the president. In the follow-up car, none of the agents are going to be there, going to get out or run off the running boards to go help the president. They're all just going to sit there. They say later that their boss told them to stand down. The guys on the running board are long gone. There's no motorcycles. There's no 112th Military Intelligence. The he's on his own. Contrast that with what happened in LBJ's car. Roof did what he's supposed to. He jumps over, he puts him down, tells everybody to get down, and he protects. He puts himself in between the bullets and the vice president. In other words, they were very conscious to save LBJ's life, as they were very conscious not to save JFK's life. And then we get into the credentials and all these people running around afterwards flashing Secret Service credentials. Bobby Hargis, pictured here. You see the motorcycle cop, that's Hargis. You see Kennedy's just already been shot, and Hargis is looking over there. He's looking right up at the grassy knoll. And he testified that the shot was fired from the area, and he would know. He's looking right there. He said, I got off I laid my motorcycle, and I ran to the right side of the street behind the light pole. So he's running up the grassy knoll. So he knows where the shot came from, and he's running in that direction. Joe Marshall Smith, police officers, testified that this woman came up to me, and she was in hysterics. She told me they're shooting the president from the bushes. I immediately proceeded up there. Same place. So you have two police officers, Dallas police, heading in the same direction towards the grassy knoll. And according to Smith, as he got there and a deputy sheriff got there, they began searching behind the picket fence. A suspicious man emerged. He says, I pulled my pistol, and at that point, the suspect produced Secret Service credentials. So then, right after the shooting, two men, suspicious, were observed hastily leaving the Texas School Book Depository. If you've ever been to Dealey Plaza, if you get behind the picket fence, you can see the parking lot. If you turn to your right, you can see the Texas School Book Depository, and you can see up the alleyway right behind it. There's a loading dock. You can see, now there's a museum there they've built on, but you can see where the loading dock used to be, and there's an alley, and you can see behind the building. So these officers are standing there behind the picket fence. They ran into somebody suspicious who flashed Secret Service credentials. Now they look over at the Texas School Book Depository. They see two men leaving. They run over there. It's not very far. They confront them, and they also produce Secret Service credentials. So you got suspicious people behind the fence. You got suspicious people in the Texas School Book Depository. Everybody's trying to leave the scene. And when these cops show up, they're all flashing Secret Service credentials. Sergeant D.V. Harkness testified when he first arrived at the rear of the Texas School Book Depository, there were some Secret Service agents there. And the reason he called them that is because they had credentials. I didn't get them identified. They told me they were Secret Service agents. Now, what's interesting is the Secret Service had previously released its roster, revealing that there would be no Secret Service agents on foot in Dealey Plaza. They were all part of the motorcade. So the question is, where'd these people posing as Secret Service agents get the credentials? Now, I've already told you a story about the seller. Now, as to who makes these, it's the CIA. They mint and print all Secret Service credentials in 1963. It was the Technical Service Divisions of the CIA. So whether you believe that these guys got these credentials from the seller, or maybe they got them from another deep state actor that was involved, who would be, they already print these credentials. It'd be very easy for them. And there's a story about Jack Ruby and how he went the day prior to a little restaurant and picked up an envelope. He checked later, it was full of Secret Service credentials. I don't know how they got them, whether it was Jack Ruby or whether it was the seller, but I know how they were delivered. I know who delivered them. His name was Charles Harrelson, pictured here, top right. Also pictured here at the bottom with the red arrow. I'll explain that in a minute. Confessed to delivering the Secret Service badges to the shooters and the spotters. In other words, everyone that I went through and said was stationed in the Daltex building, was stationed in the Texas School Book Depository, was stationed in the county records building, was stationed behind the grassy knoll, probably the one in the under the underpass as well. They all had cover. They all had credentials delivered to them by Charles Harrelson, and they were Secret Service credentials. Harrelson, I misspelled it. It's not Harrison, it's Harrelson. Um, Harrelson had been recruited out of the military to work for the CIA. He was a CIA operative. He later in life worked for Carlos Marcello and the crime family. He was a professional hitman, and he ended up going to prison. He died in prison. It was a maximum security prison because he killed a federal judge. And during the time he was dying in prison, he confessed to his role. There was a FBI informant who was in the cell with him, and he confessed to this FBI informant to his role in the JFK assassination. My role was to deliver these Secret Service badges to the shooters and the spotters. And he said I was actually arrested or detained on the scene because I was hiding in a boxcar as one of the three tramps. And here is the picture of the three tramps being led through Dealey Plaza after they were pulled out of the boxcar. He's tramp number one, right in the front there. And this is actually corroborated later by tramp number three, who's in the back with the hat, Chauncey Holt. So remember now, I misspelled his name. It's Charles Harrelson. You might recognize his son. His son's name is Woody Harrelson. He was an actor, played in Cheers all those years. He's been in a lot of different movies. Woody Harrelson said that his dad confessed to him in addition to confessing to the FBI informant in jail, which is in addition to the corroboration by Chauncey Holt. So it's pretty rock solid that Charles Harrelson delivered as cover to the shooters Secret Service badges, which were either printed by the CIA duplicates to be distributed or stolen from the Secret Service agents who lost them at the cellar the night before when they were partying. However it happened, it happened. So now what do we have so far? All right. We're just accumulating here. I'm building a case. We've already seen they ignored all the advance warnings. They traded out the experience for the inexperienced personnel. They ordered the 112th Military Intelligence Division to stand down. They partied the whole night long the night before, lost their credentials, lost their guns. They removed the bubble top. They removed the two agents, Lawton and Ripka, from the running boards. They removed the 8 motorcycles. They removed Godfrey McHugh. They removed the flatbed media. They changed the motorcade route to include 90-degree turns, tall buildings. They slowed the limo after the first shot for almost 6 seconds until the shooting was finished. They stayed in place during the shooting instead of jumping over the seat to protect the president. Roy Kellerman never moved. The follow-up car stayed in place, never moved, Sam Kinney. All 7 of the Secret Service agents that were responsible for Kenny never moved. They said they were ordered not to move, to stand down by Emory Roberts. The only one who moved was Clint Hill. And then all of the perps on the ground and in the buildings had Secret Service issued credentials as cover that they were flashing to everybody who was on the scene in that moment. So I hope we've answered that question. So far, 3 questions. The first one is, Did the Secret Service have advance warning that should have alerted them something could go wrong in Dallas? Clearly, yes. Second question, do you have to corrupt all of the Secret Service for it to be corrupted? The answer is no. You just get the top guys. And the third question is, are there evidences of security stripping that point to a Secret Service complicity in the plot? I'm not talking about a breakdown here or there. I'm talking about a comprehensive plan to strip all the security away from JFK, the protectee, so that he was wide open. And this is just up to it, including the shooting. We haven't got to what happens next. That comes next in the next episode. I think we've painted a pretty bleak picture of the Secret Service, a pretty convincing picture of its role in the plot. And of course, I haven't got to motive yet and what the payoffs to the Secret Service will be. But trust me, there is a motive here that the Secret Service has to participate in this plot. And remember now, it is the Praetorian Guard. It is the elite guard that keeps the life of the president. There's always threats out there. And as long as they agree with the president or the king or whoever they're protecting, they can provide protection that is almost unimpeachable. It's almost impenetrable, right? 60 years, they had a perfect record. But if they don't agree with the king, or if they have motive that they would prefer that the other guy to him, they can security strip in such a way it appears that all the security is still there, but it's a shell of its former self, and it's really just a wide open target. That's how the secrets, they don't pull the gun. They don't pull the trigger. They don't actually do the killing themselves. They just lay down on the job. All right, that's enough for today. Thank you for staying with me. Um, we'll pick up and continue this discussion tomorrow in the next episode. But until then, hope everybody has a blessed day. Thank you.